For almost 2,000 years, the story of Pompeii has been told the same way. A volcano erupted, ash fell from the sky, and people suffocated, slowly, tragically, buried alive. The famous plaster casts seem to prove it. Figures frozen mid-run, arms raised, mouths open, families clutching each other, a city caught in its last breath. That image, that story, has appeared in textbooks, museums, and Hollywood films for generations. But now, new scientific evidence reveals something far more disturbing. The destruction of Pompeii was not what we thought it was. It was not slow, it was not gentle, and for many victims, it was over in seconds. A sequence of events so violent, so layered, so unprecedented, that modern science is only now beginning to fully understand it. The popular understanding persists that Vesuvius erupted. A cloud of ash drifted over the city, and residents were slowly overcome. Some had time to cook bread. Some had time to set food on tables. Some simply lay down and never woke up. But new forensic analysis, geologic modeling, and DNA studies published between 2020 and 2025 have demolished this picture entirely. The evidence now shows that Pompeii was struck by a cascading series of disasters, not one. Roofs crushed by falling rock, buildings collapsed by hidden earthquakes, and then a superheated wave of gas and ash moving at over 100 kilometers per hour that killed every remaining person in the city in under 15 minutes. And if that were not enough, we now know that the identities of the famous victims, the mother and child, the two sisters, the family group, were all wrong. Almost everything history told us about Pompeii's final hours was incomplete, or simply not true. To understand what actually happened, the story must begin not with the eruption, but with the mountain itself. Mount Vesuvius sits on the Gulf of Naples in southern Italy, the only active volcano on the European mainland. It is fed by the slow collision of two tectonic plates, the African plate grinding beneath the Eurasian plate, generating heat, pressure, and a distinctive type of magma. This magma is chemically unusual, rich in silica, thick, sticky, and packed with dissolved gases. When pressure builds inside a volcano fed by this kind of magma, it does not leak and flow slowly like Hawaiian lava. It seals itself shut, traps gases, and builds toward an explosive release. But here's the critical detail that sealed Pompeii's fate. In 79 AD, Vesuvius had been dormant for approximately 3,500 years, 3.5 millennia of silence, long enough for entire civilizations to rise and fall with no memory of what the mountain could do. The famous general Spartacus had camped his army on Vesuvius's fertile slopes in 73 BC with no fear whatsoever. Roman farmers planted vineyards along its sides. Roman poets wrote about its beauty. Nobody living in 79 AD in Pompeii or anywhere nearby understood that they were living beside one of the most dangerous geological features in the world. Pompeii itself was a thriving commercial city of between 11,000 and 20,000 people. It had a forum, an amphitheater, public baths, hundreds of restaurants and wine bars called thermopolia, and street graffiti in Latin that sounds almost modern. Since Romula hung out here with Staphylos. Gaius Pomidius Diphilus was here. Whoever loves, let him flourish. These were real people, living real lives, in a city built on borrowed time. On August 24th, in the year 79 AD, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Vesuvius announced itself. A colossal eruption column containing gas, rock, and volcanic ash blasted vertically into the sky. It rose to 27 kilometers, then 33 kilometers. Scientists call this kind of eruption Plinian, after the only eyewitness to leave a written record. A 17-year-old boy named Pliny the Younger, watching from the naval base at Misenum, 29 kilometers across the bay. He wrote that the column looked like a pine tree, with a vast trunk rising straight up, and branches of debris spreading sideways at the top. What he was watching was the equivalent of 100,000 Hiroshima bombs detonating in slow motion. For the first 18 hours, the primary danger was not fire or gas, but rock, pumice. Lightweight volcanic pebbles rained onto Pompeii at a rate fast enough to accumulate nearly 3 meters in depth by morning. Roofs collapsed under the weight. Scholars now estimate that approximately 38% of all Pompeii victims, more than 1 in 3, died during this phase alone, crushed by falling structures before the volcanic surges ever arrived. But the vast majority of the city's population was not there anymore, because a crucial fact about Pompeii has been largely absent from the popular story. Most people escaped. Estimates by volcanologist Claudio Scarpati suggest between 73 and 92% of Pompeii's population successfully evacuated during the early pumice fall phase. Stables were empty, ships were missing from docks, strongboxes had been emptied of valuables. Most of the people who remained behind were disproportionately the elderly, the enslaved, the sick, and those who chose to guard their property. People who fatally underestimated what was coming next. At approximately midnight on August 24th, the eruption column became unstable. it began to collapse. When a Plinian column collapses, all of that material, gas, ash, rock fragments, superheated to hundreds of degrees, does not fall straight down. It billows outward across the landscape as a pyroclastic surge, a low-density, high-speed wave of scorching gas and ash that races across terrain like an invisible wall of heat. The first surge destroyed Herculaneum, 4 kilometers from the volcano, at approximately 1 in the morning. It arrived in under 4 minutes at a speed of 162 kilometers per hour, at a temperature between 495 and 555 degrees Celsius. That is nearly 3 times the temperature of a kitchen oven at its maximum setting. Well, for the people sheltering in the 12 beachfront boathouses of Herculaneum, death was instantaneous. Not from suffocation, not from ash, from heat, but Pompeii was different. At 10 kilometers from the vent, the surges that struck Pompeii were cooler. A 2021 study by volcanologist Pierfrancesco Delino, published in Scientific Reports, modeled the pyroclastic current that killed Pompeii's remaining population. The gas particle mixture temperature at Pompeii was approximately 115 degrees Celsius, survivable for a few minutes, but the current lasted approximately 17 minutes. 17 minutes inside a cloud of burning ash, with no escape, no shelter that could hold, and no oxygen that could be breathed safely. Delino's conclusion was devastating. Those 17 minutes inside that infernal cloud must have been interminable. This was not the quick, merciful death of the popular story. This was prolonged, conscious suffering, and even complete darkness, as superheated ash destroyed the respiratory tract from the inside. At Herculaneum, the science of how death arrived became even more extraordinary. In January 2020, researchers led by Pierpaolo Petrone at the University of Naples, Federico II, published a study in the New England Journal of Medicine. Inside the skull of a young man, approximately 20 years old, found at the Collegium Augustalium, they discovered something that had never been documented anywhere on Earth. Black, glassy material, obsidian-like, shining, found where his brain had once been. Chemical analysis confirmed it. This material contained proteins and fatty acids from human brain tissue. The man's brain had been exposed to temperatures so extreme that it liquefied, then cooled so suddenly that it transformed into glass, a process called vitrification. Not a slow burning, not a gradual decay. A near instantaneous phase change from living tissue to mineral glass at approximately 520 degrees Celsius. In a follow-up study published in October 2020, researchers found preserved neurons within the vitrified material, spherical cell bodies, tubular axons, identifiable spinal cord structures, all intact at the nanoscale, inside a piece of volcanic glass, nearly 2,000 years old. In February 2025, volcanologist Guido Giordano of Roma Tre University published the definitive explanation of how this happened. A detached ash cloud surge, a fast-moving precursor wave that separated from the main pyroclastic flow, struck Herculaneum first. It was extraordinarily hot, but brief. Hot enough to vitrify brain tissue in seconds. Brief enough to then allow rapid cooling, preserving the glass permanently. Giordano called it the only such occurrence on Earth. But the surges and the heat were not the only killers. In July 2024, a team led by Domenico Sparis at Italy's National Institute of Geophysics and Volcanology published a study in Frontiers in Earth Science. It documented 2 male skeletons, both approximately 50 years old, found at the insula of the Chase Lovers in Pompeii. Both men had survived the entire pumice fall phase. Their bodies were found on top of the pumice layer, not beneath it. They had lived through nearly 18 hours of falling rock, and then they were crushed, not by ash, not by a surge, by a collapsing wall. Sparis' analysis ruled out pumice loading and pyroclastic pressure as causes. The wall fell because of an earthquake, a syneruptive seismic event estimated at up to magnitude 5.8, and shaking the already weakened city during a brief pause between the pumice fall and the arriving surges. This was the first direct archaeological evidence that eruption accompanying earthquakes independently killed people during the disaster. The implications were immediate. If earthquakes were shaking Pompeii in the quiet window between the pumice fall and the surges, then people who had sheltered safely inside buildings, who had survived the night, who may have believed the worst was over, were suddenly forced back into the open, into the streets, where the surges found them. As Sparis told Science magazine, during the shaking, many people tried to escape their shelters, but they were likely hit by the rapid arrival of pyroclastic currents. There was no life-saving choice. And then came the discovery that struck at something even more personal than the physics of death. The faces of the victims themselves. In November 2024, a team led by Elena Pilli from the University of Florence, with David Reich from Harvard and Alyssa Mitnick from the Max Planck Institute, published a DNA study in Current Biology. They had extracted ancient DNA from fragments inside Fiorelli's famous plaster casts. The results overturned decades of established narrative. The adult figure, wearing a golden bracelet, cradling what appeared to be a small child, displayed in museums and described as a mother protecting her baby in her final moments, was not a mother, was not even female. The DNA identified the figure as a genetically male adult with probable ancestry from the Middle East, while holding a child with no genetic relationship to them whatsoever. Two embracing figures, displayed as sisters, described as dying in each other's arms, were both genetically male. The famous group in the House of the Golden Bracelet, displayed as a family since 1974, were not genetically related to each other at all. As David Reich stated in response to the findings, the genetic results encourage reflection on the dangers of making up stories about gender and family relationships based on present-day expectations. 2,000 years of storytelling built on bones and assumption. Today, the destruction of Pompeii stands as one of the most studied, most reanalyzed, and most frequently revised events in human history. The new science shows that it was not one catastrophe, but at least three, overlapping, each one arriving before survivors could recover from the last. Pumice fall and structural collapse, killing 38% of the victims who stayed. Sin, eruptive earthquakes, forcing sheltering survivors into the open. And then the surges, those superheated waves of gas and ash, moving faster than a hurricane, killing everyone remaining in under 17 minutes. At Herculaneum, even that was faster. A brain turned to glass in seconds, and the identities we assigned to the dead, the stories we told about the victims, were reflections of our assumptions, not of their lives. Just as archaeological methods continue to advance and new areas of the buried city are investigated, the final chapter of Pompeii's story is not yet written. Nearly 2,000 years later, it is still giving up its secrets. Thanks for watching. If you found this information helpful, you can like, subscribe, share, and comment your thoughts. Until next time.